everyone, welcome back to Room 237, and as we close in on the end of my reviews of the original Planet of the Apes series, we now get to part 4 with Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, which was released in 1972, and it was the first of 2 Apes films to be directed by J. Lee Thompson, again produced by Arthur B. Jacobs, and written by sequel writer Paul Dehn, as he'd written all the Apes sequels up to this point, and it would be the last to be written by Paul Dehn. Of course, returning is the ever-faithful Roddy McDowall, only this time he's playing Milo, the son of Cornelius and Zira. Returning is Natalie Trundy, the wife of Arthur P. Jacobs, who played Albina in Beneath, Stevie in Escape, and now we see her as Ape Lisa. So this is really the beginning of seeing how the Planet of the Apes came to be. Because in the last film, Escape, we see Cornelius and Zira time traveled to contemporary 70s America. And Cornelius tells us sort of the history of the apes. How there was a great plague that wiped out the cats and dogs. Man wanting pet companionship took in apes. But apes became, really big animals to take care of. They got smarter. So then realized that, we can have apes as slaves and doing menial jobs. And then that's what led to the revolt of the apes to become the Planet of the Apes. Although it seems like everything is kind of accelerated because Milo becomes Caesar, who becomes the revolutionary ape. It's not Aldo like in Cornelius' story. It takes a different turn. The outcome's the same, which is pretty interesting considering the... I don't know if I mentioned it in my Escape from the Planet of the Apes review, but this one scientist who's talking about his theory of time and fate of future, how it's kind of like a motorway. It's the same outcome, but you have a different way to get there. So it's not Aldo being the first ape to say no, but we still have the plague that wipes out pets. The apes that got taken in as pets turned into slaves. Only we pick up the beginning of this film in 1991, year I was born. We've skipped all the way ahead to apes being turned into slaves, being conditioned, trained, and managed to become slaves. Caesar, who's now 18, he was raised by circus owner Armando, played by Ricardo Montalban. Loving, caring Armando, he raised Milo. And in the very beginning of the film, we see how apes are treated. Chimps wear green jumpsuits, gorillas wear red. We don't really see the orangutans in this one. But, they really are slaves. They're, even at one point while he's walking Milo, someone asked, do you have a permit where he can dress like that? They're passing out flyers for the circus. And just a general mishap, like ape trips or, starts to refuse and they just start beating, cattle prodding him. And Milo happens to say, lousy human bastard, which they overhear, the humans do. Armando takes the blame for it, but everyone's saying, no, his ape said it. Because even though Cornelius and Zira were killed at the end of the film with a baby chimp, which wasn't theirs, she switched babies at the last second so that their intelligent ape could live on. It's been sort of a conspiracy or urban legend that it wasn't their baby and that their intelligent offspring is still out there somewhere. So then, we eventually see, well, I'll get into that. But this has to be my favorite sequel. Out of all 4 sequels, as much as I really do like Escape, Conquest has to be my favorite. When I first saw these, I'd already seen Rise and Dawn, because I bought this right as War was coming out. So I remember reading about these films and seeing how Rise and Dawn, the reboot trilogy takes a lot from Conquest and Battle. And I saw that this is Caesar's story, how we've kind of gone back into time. I think this was supposed to be a reboot for the series. But either way, we went back in time. Now we see the dawn of the Apes again, told with Caesar. So I was very excited to see how it was handled in this series. And it's definitely the darkest Apes film. I mean, War is very bleak. It's a very depressing, bleak film. Burton's is just Tim Burton dark. And really the beginning of Tim Burton's branding, I guess. I'm not a fan of this film. Certainly of the original series, Conquest is the darkest. It's the only one to be rated PG, where all the rest are G. But this is back when PG actually meant something. Because it is the bloodiest, it is the most violent. It does really show the cruelty of man to beast, which reflects man's inhumanity towards other humans. Because this came out right on the heels of the height of the civil rights movement. So, and it's still very relevant today. But I was very excited to see this one. And this is probably my favorite Roddy McDowall performance. I'm a fan of Roddy McDowall anyway, whether it's Planet of the Apes or otherwise. His appearance in Twilight Zone, his appearance in Night Gallery, Fright Night. Big fan of Roddy McDowall. But here, he really gets a chance to shine. He gives a big speech at the end. I really like the look of the film. It does have a very futuristic look, very straight angles of the architecture and technology. But it looks believable for near future set pieces, which I believe it was just the 20th Century Fox. It was just a piece of property that they had. Also, conflicts with color. J. Lee Thompson is a very... he had directed Guns of Navarone and the original Cape Fear. He's a very detailed director. Like, there's a lot of attention to color in this. Like, every human is wearing black. Apes, chimps are wearing green. Gorillas are wearing red. And it's just very... the insides of the buildings are very black and white. It's got this very gray, concrete look to it. But basically, Armando hides Milo, and then he says, I'm just going to go down to the police, tell them I was the one that said it, said, lousy human bastard, I'll come back to get you by nightfall, because I don't really have anything on me. If I'm not back, go down to the harbor, you have to take your clothes off, and then get in the cargo with the other apes. And it's a very touching scene where Milo is holding on to Armando, begging him not to go, and to go back to the circus, and Roddy McDowall gets the tears, and it's very emotional. Imagine leaving both, combination of pet and child, in this dark, rundown building. But Armando was arrested. Milo has to go down to this cargo and slip into a cage where he's taken to ape management, which is where apes are pretty much tested and to see where like how smart they are. he gets his picture taken, fingerprinted, all in a very futuristic way. And then he gets led through this building where he sees, like, there's like a room for training to work at a club where they got lights going and pouring a glass of water with the tray. Another one of how they respond to flamethrowers, shock therapy. They're always given a task, like how to wash your hands or pour a drink, set a table. They show them once, then they undo it. They say do. And if they mess up, they yell no, the humans. So their only orders is do and no. And Caesar sees all this systematic abuse going on. He gets thrown into this futuristic holding cell where there's like an invisible door that shocks him. He's given a banana. He breaks his banana into pieces to give to the other chimps. Then when he shows his smarts, growing up intelligent, he can wash his hands perfectly, use a faucet, pour a glass. So then when it comes to auction time, they say this one's been very, very smart. He's docile towards humans, does what he's told. And he's bought by he's bought at the auction by Governor Breck, who's the big villain of the movie, which he's played by Don Murray. And his assistant is Harry Rhodes, who plays McDonald. And this is also the first appearance of Culp, who I think is the vice governor, played by Severn Darden. But the governor, he has, they purposely gave him like a black turtleneck and like a black overcoat to really get this sort of Third Reich kind of dictatorship look to him, as everyone else does with their black costumes. He buys Milo, and then up in his office, he's given the task to pour mixed bourbon drinks. And then Breck allows him to choose his own name. He gives him a dictionary, and he flips through and he points. Cleverly, he points to Caesar. And he kind of gives him a look like, I didn't just flip to a random word like you wanted me to. I flipped to Caesar. To which Breck replies, a king. And then throughout most of the movie, he realizes what's going on. The only human that shows him any kind of sympathy would be Breck's assistant, McDonald, played by Harry Rhodes, who is an African American. We see he does show a lot of sympathy towards the apes, and part of that is mentioned in the speech at the very end. Armando, while being held, is being interrogated by Culp, who, there's, what was that thing called? The Authenticator. Because he tries saying that Milo is his ape, he's not the offspring of the talking apes. They have a picture of Cornelius, and they're like, it looks just like your ape, even though they just have a flyer drawing. He's like, my ape was born, like a month before the arrival of the talking apes. There's no way. And then they put him through the questionnaire with the Authenticator, this futuristic sort of cylinder that comes down from the ceiling, kind of gives like a ray of, kind of like the lasso of truth, makes you tell the truth. So they ask him if, is your ape who he says he is? To which he fights the answer, and he runs and jumps out the building and dies. And then we have one of my favorite Roddy McDowall acting moments. This is really what sets Caesar off to really begin the revolution and revolt revolution, revolt. I know, same thing. But the rise and revolt of the apes. He's outside and he sees a newspaper like a circus owner falls to death. And and it's at this moment where and the way it's lit is very well. Of course, Roddy McDowall playing both Cornelius and Caesar. He's gonna look more or less the same. Caesar has a bit more darker tan tone to his skin. But this scene is very, very dark, dimly lit. The light that shines is really in his eyes, the tears that are falling, and, just the way he just lets the tears flow. And he starts with that ape hiss that he has, that as you can see his brow. Because Roddy McDowall does do that. He flexes his nose a lot and kind of does things with his brow. But then he lets out very humane screams of anger and pain and loss of faith in humanity. Because he knows Armando didn't die by accident or natural causes. He knows it was because of this dictatorship. So just that moment of his reaction to Armando's death is a very powerful moment. Especially for, both in the film and just what the actor did. So it's at this time we see that Caesar is kind of standing off into the distance with these apes who are doing their public duties, like a guerrilla waiter with a lighter going to light this woman's cigarette, or a shoe-shining chimp taking the shoe polish against someone's sock, misbehaving. Because then some apes will get sent to ape management. Ape management will become so overpopulated, they can't take any more apes. And then, they'll be left where they are. But also, there's this warehouse where apes are meeting. So if they come across any kind of weapons, like we see cleavers and hatchets, forks and knives, they start collecting. They all start bringing it to Caesar. A grocery list. People give their slave apes grocery lists. They bring it to Caesar, and he'll write stuff they need, like a 5-gallon can with 5 gallons of gasoline, or one ape brings in a shopping list with a new Colt 45. Caesar writes, 2 Colt 45s, 100 rounds of ammunition. So that way they can just have all the stuff coming in. Meanwhile, Culp has been doing his investigation and realizes that the shipment on the harbor that Caesar snuck into comes from an area in the world, Borneo, that has no chimpanzees. Chimpanzees. Not Borneo. It's Bosnia. That's what he says. Because it was just orangutans, even though we don't see orangutans for the rest of the film. So that's when they start to think, well, how did a chimp get in there? It came in the same night we apprehended Armando. So that's when they realize that ape is the one that we're looking for. And then they realize that they look through all their records, that ape is Caesar. So Caesar, who works in the archive area for the governor, along with Lisa, in the files, McDonald is called and told to send Caesar to, Breck's office. And McDonald knows why, so he covers for him. He says, I sent him on an errand. Caesar can hear what's going on. McDonald walks him down the hall. He's told over the speaker to pick up the phone. He's like, I still haven't seen Caesar, but I'll send him when I see you. And this is where Caesar finally reveals himself to McDonald by speaking. And expressing his intent on overthrowing Breck, which McDonald understands. He says it's suicide no matter what. Caesar believes that it needs to be tried. There needs to be the attempt to show we're not going to take it anymore. Whether this attempt with me and these apes are suicide, or the next revolt, it needs to keep happening. And he doesn't care if it's a suicide mission. It's something he really believes in. And just as McDonald sort of gives him a window to escape, Caesar's captured. He's brought to the area of the building where there's the shock treatment, and he's electrically tortured into speaking. He's strapped down to the table, and Roddy McDowall does this thing where because he's strapped down, but his whole midsection kind of rises up, and his head's upside down, and when he's being shocked, they just crank the things, and then he acts like he's getting but he is getting electrocuted. To which I think he says, "Have pity." I think that's what he says when they realize, okay, we got him. And then they sentence Caesar to death. So the guy that was operating the machine starts undoing him to say, we're going to send him down to be injected to death. And Culp is just he's hooked up for electrocution, so electrocute him. But at this point, McDonald had slipped away down to the control room, turned the controls off. And Caesar must already know what's going on. But when the guy cranks it, Caesar goes into violent convulsions of being electrocuted. And then Breck is well, there, he's dead. So they leave. The guy undoes Caesar, but then we see Caesar was faking it, kills him. And then we see the rise of the apes. The whole last act of the film is all Caesar leading all the apes to all the places where apes are working, ape management, everywhere where there's apes, and rounding them all up. And they start setting these traps with gasoline and sort of counterattacks, because it's all in this very well done sort of think Clockwork Orange, where they beat up the homeless man, just the concrete, but it's walkways and tunnels, very square and symmetrical. And first there's guards, then there's guards with bigger weapons, and there's SWAT guys with the shields. And the apes have smoke bombs, and they already have trails of gasoline and kerosene that they set off at the right moment. And it's pretty bloody. It's 1972, and it has that 70s really thick, vibrant red, Dawn of the Dead blood. But watching it this time, I remember it being bloodier, but it's still pretty bloody. We see apes get hit in the face with blood pouring out. When we see apes or people laying there dead, we see the blood spots all over them, which looks like paint. And this goes on for a whole act of the films. There's just more waves of more apes taking out more, more hordes of guards and army. And oddly enough, this last act of the film is more epic than Battle for the Planet of the Apes. And I know that was one complaint when it came out, was it, because this had a very small budget. It had a budget of 1.8 million, because they just 1.7. The films kept making less and less and less, so they kept making the budget less and less and less. So there was profit. It made 9.7, but I know one of the complaints was people could feel the epicness of this third act, but felt they were so constricted by the budget that it couldn't be on the grand scope that it deserved. I thought it looked just fine, which I also believe this is the first film to not have Jerry Goldsmith on the score. The score was Tom Scott. It did still have John Chambers doing the makeup, so the score is a little different. But I mean, eventually the humans are so overrun by the apes. The apes even storm like a. I just had a bad brain fart. A sporting goods store, and they take all the rifles out. And this version has two different endings. It has the theatrical version, has the extended version. The extended version is actually the original one before it went into theaters, or even when it initially went into theaters. And then it was taken back, recut, got its actual theatrical edition. And what that is McDonald finally shows up. You know, Caesar rises. There's flames all behind him. Apes are cheering. They have Breck. The apes have Breck. Which actually, before that, they storm Breck's office so they could break out Lisa and get Breck. And Caesar asks him, "Why did you turn us from pets into slaves?" And Breck tells him, because apes pretty represent the beast within man. We must suppress it. If we fight, that basically is reasoning. Apes represent the beast within man. Man comes from apes. If we stay on top and dominant, then we'll suppress the beast within, and I guess be the more superior race. Caesar didn't like that answer, but that's when Breck gets brought out. He's standing up on his ledge, and Breck, is being held by all the gorillas with the butt of their rifles. But this is when McDonald shows up, and McDonald tries to bargain with him, saying, this isn't the way, this isn't how you gain freedom, this isn't how things will change, but by what right do you have to just overthrow with violence? To which Caesar replies, the slaves law, the slaves against the prosecutors, or persecutors, rather. And to which McDonald says, I, a descendant of slaves, can tell you this is not the way. And Caesar tries to tell him, when there's fire, there's smoke. Within that smoke, you'll see the rise of my people. And this is the speech that Roddy McDowall gives that really makes this performance better than it already is. And say that, word of this will spread and apes everywhere will rise. And there's a new dawn upon you, and that day is now. In the original cut, in the extended cut, that's when Caesar says that day is upon you now, and he points at Breck, and the apes brutally just bash Breck to death with their rifles. And then the camera sort of zooms in on Caesar, just kind of looking at all his apes, and we just see a wonderful shot of all the apes, Caesar, the buildings, flames all around him, flames in the sky, of optical effect. The black night sky turning red, and then the flames. Great looking ending. A bit bleak and cynical, but the way it was recut for the theatrical ending was there was another part to his speech where it just shows like this part of his face, so you can't tell he's not really speaking. Even though if you listen to Roddy McDowall's voice, you can tell he doesn't have the restrictions of the makeup. Where he says, but maybe this is as far as we need to go. Maybe we can be the greater race by showing compassion and sympathy. So we've come this far. For now, let's put down our weapons. And then, originally, we saw the apes raising their rifles to kill Breck. But here they just rewound, they just reversed the film so it looked like they were setting it down peacefully. To which then Caesar, we get the shot of him standing in front of his apes saying, "We're now looking at the first day of the planet of the apes." Then it ends. And even though I will say that ending is more in character with how we got to know Caesar, the extended cut really lets him hash out all that anger. But going from conquest to battle and seeing how his character is in battle, the theatrical ending does make more sense. To be, we can be better than this. We can be the race with compassion, and we can set all this aside. And I guess I was watching the behind the scenes of Conquest, and that whole speech between Caesar and, because some of the things that McDonald says is, do you think your acts of violence and rage and your riots will solve anything? And, Caesar's like, when there's flames, there is smoke. And there was like the African American audience was like cheering in the theater for Caesar. This is my favorite sequel. I mean, I like how Escape brought us back into time to more or less present day, and now we're seeing how the apes took over. And this was really the first full-length film, Planet of the Apes, that made the apes the victims and humans the bad guys. So we're really seeing it come full circle. We see it come complete full circle with battle. But I really like this film. It's definitely the darkest. I appreciate its dark, violent tone. It doesn't make it feel cheesy or corny. Like how are apes gonna, take over the world? They have explosions, fires, plenty of blood. I mean, for a PG movie, which I know PG meant more back then, but I really love Conquest, Planet of the Apes. I love this whole series, except for Beneath. But Conquest and Battle were always two of my favorite sequels. And part of that might be because I'm very partial to this trilogy, which borrows heavily from Conquest and Battle. But even as separate films, I enjoy them. I do like Conquest more than Battle, but I'll get to Battle next. So we're getting towards the end of the series, and even though Conquest is kind of a reboot, I wouldn't watch it first. I would watch it fourth, obviously, just because I know some people will. It happens with comics all the time too. Well, reboot means I can just start with a. But even though I really do enjoy Escape, I mean, Conquest is up there with like the original for me. It's almost level with the original, but for different reasons. But that's Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, and my next video will be the last of the original series, Battle. Thank you for watching.